Если б знали вы, как мне дороги подмосковные вечера. Hello, comrades, and welcome back to Ushanka Show. Здравствуйте, дорогие товарищи. My name is Sergey, and I was born in USSR. Меня зовут Сергей, и я родился в Советском Союзе. My special thanks и огромное спасибо to all my supporters on patreon.com. Thank you, comrades. It's greatly appreciated. And today we're gonna make a review about the most important documents of every Soviet citizen. As we used to say, без бумажки ты какашка, а с бумажкой человек. Which translates, without papers, you're a piece of dookie. With the papers, you're a human. So as you know, I was one of those lucky comrades who was born in the Soviet Union. I was actually born in July of 1971. And of course, right away I received my very first document. Свидетельство о рождении. So that's like a birth certificate. And of course, every kid who was born in the Soviet Union got one of those. This is the cover of my birth certificate, свидетельство про народження. Since I was born in the Ukrainian Soviet Social Republic, instead of the symbol of Soviet Union, I have a symbol of Ukrainian Republic. This document is actually almost 50 years old. How depressing. So it's hard to read what's on the cover. And here you can see how my birth certificate looks inside. So I have my name, born in July 1971 in Kiev. This document was issued on August 6, same year. On the right side, name of my parents, Nikolai Trofimovich, and his nationality, Ukrainian. My mother, Yelena Sergeyevna, once again, Ukrainian. And their marriage was registered in Kiev in Zaliznychny ZAGS. And also right in the middle, there's a black ink rectangular stamp. This is about my passport. So when I received my passport in August of 1987, when I turned 16, this is the mark that I got my Soviet passport. And even if you lived in a socialist country, we had no social security number. So the only ID any kid would have will be just his birth certificate all the way till he turned 16. And at the age of 16, you become an official citizen of the Soviet Union and you receive a passport. But keep in mind, Soviet passport, it's not like American passport that you travel overseas. This is actually for inside the country. For traveling abroad, Soviet citizen had to apply for a different passport. So we have inner passport and outside passport. And it looked different and only could be used overseas. But before we get into the topic of Soviet passports, there was another document that Soviet kids were receiving. In the 7th grade, so the age of 14, Soviet children could become members of young communist organization or so-called Komsomol and receive an ID, Komsomol ID. So this is the cover of Komsomol ID. You probably recognize the guy on the cover, Comrade Lenin. Пролетарии всех стран, соединяйтесь на этап. All the workers of the world unite. Всесоюзный, Ленинский, Коммунистический союз молодежи. So it's all over Soviet Union, Lenin Communist Union of Youth. But we usually just say Komsomol. This is how the Komsomol ID looked inside. So this is pretty serious. You got a serial number, you got your picture, and you're paying monthly dues. Along with Komsomol ID, everyone will also receive a special VLKSM badge. So here's the picture of me in the 8th grade. So we're talking 1985-86. And after you're done staring in my horrible, ugly birth control glasses, you might notice that on my chest there is that little Komsomol badge. Okay, and now back to the topic of the Soviet passport. So the passport was the most important document, ID, for the Soviet citizen. It didn't have expiration date, so it remained the same for the rest of your life. And of course, your passport didn't change, but your face did change with age. So first picture went at the age of 16, then you have to retake your photo again at the age of 25, and again at 45. And even in the 80s, all the pictures were black and white, and you had to go to photo studio for specific size passport pictures. When a couple gets married in the Soviet Union, they would get an ink stamp in their passports with information when and where they registered their marriage. So it actually was quite common for a girl to ask her boyfriend to see his passport if things got serious and she may be considering to let him tap that. She would ask him, hey, can I see your passport, to make sure he's not married and he's not lying that he is single and he's in love with her. If you follow my channel for a while, you should know about so-called propiska. That's official registration, permission from government for you to live in specific city, in specific apartment or house. So that ink step with information about your address where you propisan, where you registered to, also will be in your passport. If you're male, you'll have also ink stamp about your military service as well. Quite a few people had their blood type ink stamp in the passport too. One of the most important information that your passport had was so-called пятая графа, or the fifth line. So if you count from the top, your fifth line is where your nationality is. So if your fifth line in the Soviet passport says Jewish, Еврей, you may have trouble getting into specific colleges or getting specific jobs. So there were cases when Jewish people were trying to change their nationality in their passport from Jewish to Russian, and we even had this quite horrible joke is when one Jewish person called another guy and said, hey, we need to run. There's a bunch of angry Russian workers marching down the street, and they're looking for Jews to beat them up. And his friend answers, I don't care. My passport says I'm Russian. He's like, I know, but they don't punch passports. They punch faces. Okay, my friends, so this was the part one, the most important Soviet documents. We have a couple more to discuss, so there'll be another video. I hope you enjoyed this story and learned something new. As always, don't forget to like this video, share with your friends. We'll talk to you soon. So today we're returning to the topic of the most important documents in the Soviet Union for the citizens. So this is part two. As we used to say, без бумажки ты какашка, а с бумажкой человек. Which translates, without papers, you're a piece of dookie. With the papers, you're a human. But first of all, I would like to answer a couple of questions that popped below the previous video. The first question, were you expected to bring your passport with you every time you left your house? And the answer is no. Actually, it was hardly ever that we took our passport somewhere. My mother kept it in a special location where we kept all our documents. So no, you didn't have to have your passport with you. It was only like if you go for some, you're getting a job or you are applying for a new apartment or something like that, then you bring your passport. Otherwise, no, we weren't required to carry any IDs on us. Another question was that why Russia was still using old Soviet documents for years. So there was a picture of the Soviet passport was still issued in 1994, 3 years after the Soviet Union was no more. So the viewer was asking about this photo. So this is a passport which issued in January 25th of 1994. So it said it's 3 years after Soviet Union disappeared. But this not is Soviet passport like for inside. This is actually the photo of Soviet passport for traveling overseas. Well, it's not only Russia. Same situation existed in Ukraine. As you probably know, this assembly of the Soviet Union wasn't really like well-planned in advance event. It just happened like overnight. So we had probably millions of pre-printed documents and no new documents. So they were utilizing old Soviet documents to keep on issuing IDs. For example, my passport for traveling abroad, I used it all the way till 1997. It's expired in 1997. So I traveled in 1995 to America with the Soviet passport. It just had a small ink stamp on the front, says property of Ukraine. And another question was about Komsomol, our youth communist organization. Was it something that young Soviet of the right age would be enrolled almost by default, or something when a young person would generally enroll if you were a complete doofus, or did the kids had a genuine enthusiasm? I don't know about earlier years. Probably was way more enthusiasm in the 40s, especially probably 30s. Maybe some in 50s. In 80s, wasn't much enthusiasm going on. It was totally your decision. I would say in my class we probably had 50-50. The only reason I joined Komsomol is because I was told they accept only Komsomol members into the college. So I just had to join. But otherwise, like my father never joined Komsomol. I believe he was forced to be joined in army because his officer wanted to have 100% Komsomol members. Okay, and now back to the topic of the most important Soviet documents. Actually, I would like to correct myself. There was another document that every youth in Soviet Union would get before getting a passport. So first document was birth certificate. Second one will be your certificate of finishing school. So as I mentioned before, we went to school for 10 years, but you can quit school after 8 years, and you will get a document just like this one you see. It called свидетельство о неполном среднем образовании. So this is a document about incomplete middle degree. So high degree will be, or higher degree, there'll be college, university, and middle degree, as we call it, will be your 10 years. 8 years, it's called неполное, so it's not complete. And this is actually my ID. I apologize for that red ink. It was next to the stamp, and its stamp got transferred. So here's my свидетельство об образовании, education certificate of finishing 8 grades. So my name was born in 1971, and that certifies that I was studying in school number 254, and I finished it in 1986. So that's a Chernobyl year. And I had good attitude and good behavior. And then there's the list of all the subjects that I studied and what it was my final degree. And might as well just let's go again through the subjects. Ukrainian language 5, Ukrainian literature 5, which is those are excellent. Russian language 4, Russian literature 5, algebra 4, geometry 5, history 5, basics of the Soviet state and law 4, geography 5, physics 4, chemistry 4, biology 5, foreign language, and it says in English 5, labor education 5, drawing 5, art 5, 4, music and singing 5, which is hysterical because I can't sing, and physical education 4. And it was issued to me on June 11 of 1986. So that's my official document about finishing 8 grades of the Soviet school. So that was my 8 grades education certificate, свидетельство об неполном среднем образовании, when I was 15. And by the way, thank you, Joshua, for this nice Photoshop. I like that. And now let's take a look at my full school degree, say high school diploma, I guess you can call it. Its official name is Аттестат о среднем образовании. So as I we call it middle degree. So I received the certificate in 1988, 10 years after I started school, when I was 17 years old. Okay, so here it is. Once again, my name, born in Kiev in July 1971. Kind of interesting why they want to provide that information. And this is a certificate that in 1988, I finished a complete course of middle general education school number 254 in Kiev, and I demonstrated excellent attitude and excellent behavior, and here's my grades. So once again, Ukrainian language 4, which is good. Ukrainian literature 4, Russian language 4, Russian literature 5, which is excellent, algebra and initial analysis 4, geometry 4, computer science 5, history of the USSR 5, general history 5, social science 5, geography 5, biology 5, physics 5, astronomy 5, chemistry 4, foreign language as English 5, labor education 4, initial military preparedness 4, physical education 4. And then it says I also successfully finished the program about psychology of the family life. Don't remember anything of that. Technical drawing, yes. Music, and also some courses of chemistry and the basics of computer science. Kind of interesting add-on. Don't remember definitely psychology of the family life. So this is how the certificates of your education would look in the Soviet Union. Okay, moving along. So the next important document that every Soviet citizen had was Trudovaya Knizhka, the labor book. Since it was illegal in Soviet Union not to work without valid reason for longer than 3 months, everyone had one of those labor books. And I already made several videos on this topic. We covered in quite detail labor book of the collective farm worker, my distant relative Nila. I also have the labor book of my mom, and she gave it to me, and this is actual cover. And I'm planning to make a separate video to talk in detail about her work experience, her work career in Soviet Union. And when you join labor force, you probably will join also the labor union, Profsoyuz, so you also will get a Profsoyuz ID. This is the cover of labor union ID, or we call it Profsoyuzny bilet. And this is how the document looks inside. This is actually, once again, my mother's Profsoyuzny bilet. She was born in 1948 and she became union member in 1968, so an age of 20. And this one is actually her second labor union ID, issued in 1987 when she got a different job. And here you could see the membership due stamps. So you pay your dues every month and you get a stamp in exchange when they glue into your ID. And I'm planning to make a separate video covering in detail these documents. This is what we're going to look at it right now. So we need to move on. And another important topic that I hope I will be able to cover one day is banking system in the Soviet Union, and especially so-called Sberkassa, Soviet Savings Bank. So we'll talk about later, but right now we're going to take a look at our savings book. So here you see the cover of our Sberегательная книжка. So that's savings book that you keep track how much money you have on your savings account. And as you may guess, we didn't have many choices where to keep your savings, or you can keep it cash at home, or you take your money to the only savings bank in the Soviet Union called Sberегательный bank, or quite often it was just called Sberkassa. Interest rate was 3% a year, and just to give you kind of the idea, my family, so both parents working, making about 300 rubles a month, kind of towards the end of 80s, we managed to save 5,000 rubles in 20 years. The next very important document, but of course not everyone in Soviet Union had it, was the Communist Party member ID, Partbilet. So we just call it Partийный билет, party ticket, party ID, and this is the cover and first page. And once again, you may guessed already, we had only one party available to join, the Communist Party of Soviet Union. Otherwise, you remain беспартийный, no party affiliation. And around 1990, at its peak, Communist Party in Soviet Union had 18.8 million members, and general population was about 288 million. So about 6.5% of the Soviet population were members of the Communist Party. I didn't say they were communists, but they were members of the Communist Party. And the last Soviet document we're going to talk about today is driver's license, водительские права. Not many Soviet citizens had driver's license because it was quite challenging to buy a car in the Soviet Union. In fact, only 35 people out of 1,000 owned a car in the Soviet Union in the middle of 1980s. And just like in the United States, you're supposed to have your driver's license, your водительские права when you're driving. They had 5 categories. A is motorcycle, B is a regular car, and that's what most people had. B, driver's license. C was like a trucks. D, buses, and E, semi-trucks. Okay, дорогие товарищи, so this concludes our short review of the most important documents in the Soviet Union. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like it and share with your friends. Меня зовут Сергей, я родился в Советском Союзе.
This guy may have actually grown up in the USSR, but he's still a charlatan. The view he takes in his earlier videos is very much, some parts were good, some parts bad, overall life was fine, but there has been a steady slide into sensationalistic
Don't you love these comments? They're so passionate. It's like adding some spice to my bland, long and boring videos. Thanks again, Lisha from Finland, who's helping me on these comments. So today we're going to talk a little bit more about Soviet retail. And if you're new to my channel, I covered this topic in quite detail. There's a separate playlist on my channel called Soviet Retail, and I strongly recommend to watch those videos as well. As the part of this story, we're also going to touch the topic of Soviet passport and propiska. And when I said propiska and you had no idea what I'm talking about, I strongly recommend to check my other video when I in detail described propiska. But before we begin, it's time for the lesson of the Russian language. Урок русского языка. Passport. Passport. I don't think I need to translate this word. It's passport, obviously, duh. And that was the most important document of every Soviet citizen that you would receive when you turned 16. Passport. Propiska. Propiska. You can't really translate this word, but every Soviet citizen was required to be registered, or, as we say, sign in. So прописать, it's to sign in someone at the address of your residence, and you will get an ink stamp in your passport with your propiska. So that's where people see where you live, where you registered. So today we're going to analyze this interesting photo, and our lesson of Russian language still is going on. So let's take a look at this interesting picture. So on the left, that young fellow with bright red cheeks, he is покупатель. Покупатель. He is a customer. Покупатель. And on the right, lady in white, she is sitting at the cash register. Kassa. So she is not actually a seller. She is кассир. Кассир. So she is the clerk at the cash register. Кассир. So what we got here is a customer, покупатель, shows кассир, a clerk, his passport. Покупатель показывает кассиру свой паспорт. So what we got here is the failure to communicate. So here's a million-ruble question. Why, oh why, a customer needs to show his passport to the clerk? Now, you're welcome to pause the video and post your comment, and then in the end of the video we're going to compare how close you got to the right answer. First of all, you need to remember that our passport was the most important document for any Soviet citizen. So we didn't just carry it with us every day, because it'll be quite a painful process if you lose it and trying to restore it. We usually hid our documents, our passports, along with the birth certificate, just like Americans keep their social security cards somewhere in a safe place at home. They don't keep them in their wallets. Same way, we didn't carry our passports on a daily basis, only for special occasions. So here, our first clue. This purchase was quite important if the young fellow brought his passport to show the clerk So it's interesting already, right? So at the time of recording this video, I can only assume, I can only make an educated guess. So some of you who paused the video and wrote their comment, you're probably thinking he brought his passport to prove his age so he can purchase alcohol, right? Which is kind of makes sense. And a lot of people, former Soviet people, in discussion under this picture claimed exactly the same thing. He shows the passport to show he's old enough to buy alcohol. Personally, I don't believe so, and let me explain you why. But if you take a close look, it appears that a passport opens somewhere in the middle, not in the beginning where you have your date of birth. So what's in the middle of the passport? Propiska. So why in the world would this guy show his propiska in his passport in the grocery store? So now we need to talk about Soviet retail, the big picture. Imagine you're a tall person, like I don't have to imagine I'm 6 foot 2 inches. In high humidity conditions, I'm 6 foot 3 inches. So I had experience when a blanket is too short for me. So when you're trying to keep your head warm, your feet will get exposed, be cold, right? And vice versa. So you constantly pull this blanket back and forth. Kind of similar situation existed in Soviet retail. We did not have enough goods and groceries for the whole country to supply with like red plenty. So Soviet government had to make hard choices. Just kidding, there was no hard choice. Soviet government was located in Moscow. So Moscow got the priority in getting groceries and other goods. And it made sense because most foreign tourists, when they arrived to Soviet Union, they probably 90% came straight to Moscow or Leningrad. So we had two storefronts for the Soviet Union, Moscow and Leningrad, now it's called St. Petersburg, that were getting pretty much all the goods they needed. So those grocery stores had a good supply. They were stocked with items that you would have hard time finding just 100 kilometers out of Moscow. So after Moskva and Leningrad, down the food chain there would be Kiev, the hometown where I grew up, capital of Ukraine, Minsk, capital of Belarus, and so on. So that will be second priority, and then whatever left will be delivered to the smaller towns, and then in the end of it will be villages, like a village that I grew up in northern Ukraine. We had bread delivered there only 3 times a week. It was instantly sold out, and shelves were pretty much bare, besides some basic items like cigarettes, matches, sugar, salt, which were sold in bags like you buy by kilogram. There was hardly anything on the shelves. Well, it sounds like an optimal solution, right? Well, not really if you consider the human factor, because people from surrounding areas figure out pretty quick that just, 5 hours away, there's plenty of food at the grocery stores. So people started traveling to Moscow, to Leningrad by train, mostly because hardly anyone owned a car. And surrounding area, some people took overnight train. So they will arrive to Moscow early in the morning, do their shopping, then hop on a train, and once again overnight trip back to their hometown. So picture like if people in Michigan will be traveling to Chicago or Detroit to buy basic groceries. People do travel to Chicago to do shopping, but because there is some stores that they just don't exist anywhere else, only in the big cities. Here, just for basic groceries, people would travel on an overnight train. And such trains got a nickname, колбасный поезд или колбасная электричка, sausage train or sausage. Электричка is like an electric suburban train. And that was actually a joke. It sounds like this. What is it? It's long, it's green, and it smells like a sausage. And the answer, that's electric suburban train from Moscow, or it's a train from Moscow. So people traveling loaded with groceries, that the whole train smells like sausage. So once again, we have this Soviet cat and mouse game when government found solution to supply big cities with goods, and then people from small cities found a solution to get themselves supplied. So once again, sounds we got this interesting situation, and once again, we need to look at the human factor. So picture if you Moscovite, so you live in Moscow or some other large city, Leningrad, Kiev, and you go to the grocery store and shelves are empty because over the weekend people from out of city came and bought out everything. Or you come to the grocery store and there's a huge line and you realize all the people are not from your neighborhood, they actually came from far away and you're buying your groceries. So of course you'll get upset, and of course you will try to find some solution to fix that problem. So finally, after this long detour, we come back to our main photo, main character. So this is what I think guy is doing. He's showing his propiska. So he shows the cashier lady at the kassa that he's a local guy. He lives right here, so he has the right to purchase the goods. So this is what people in Moscow and Leningrad came up with. They began requesting proof that you live in the area, and it came so localized. So if, for example, if you live in the next district, you won't be able to buy groceries in the other one. They just try to lock their goods in specific areas, and I think this is what happened in this photo. He proves that he is a local guy. He shows his propiska. So once again, imagine you arrive to Mall of America. I think it's the largest mall in the United States and probably in the world. And you're trying to buy something and they ask you to show driver's license and they'll tell you, hey, you're not local, you can't buy these goods, or you're limited to purchase only one item per person or something like that. Sounds pretty crazy, right? And those limits, they were up to local authorities. Sometimes they would just limit the amount you can buy. So like if, for example, you're only allowed to buy only half of kilo of butter if you're not from this area, if you're not from this neighborhood, right? You think it's a bad neighborhood, like that joke goes. But they actually come up with a better system because people didn't like carrying their passports around. As I said, it was really important documents, just like for American Social Security card. So there was a different solution. In Moscow, since that was the place they had the most problem with out of town customers, they came up with Kartochka Покупателя. So there's a customer ID with the photo. It shows the proof that you're local and you're allowed to purchase goods at a specific store. So Kartochki Покупателей was the Moscow solution for the problem of out-town people scooping up their goodies. As a person who was born and grew up in Kiev, capital of Ukraine, my family never had to travel to Moscow to buy groceries because Kiev was supplied pretty well. But still, every time when we travel up north to our village to stay there for the summer vacation, we were always carrying full bags of groceries up there because we knew that local grocery store would have pretty much nothing besides just basic goods, like I mentioned, bread, salt, sugar. There was really not much stuff, so we had to bring our own groceries for that month. And when I say groceries, I mostly mean sausages, like колбаса, kielbasas. Because in the village we had plenty of like milk, of course, because my grandparents had a cow. We had eggs because they had chickens. They had a pig, so there was pork and salo. So the basic groceries, that foodstuffs that my grandparents had, it was okay. But some items that we liked but couldn't get at the local grocery store, we had to bring with us. And I just want to add that even for people who grew up in the Soviet Union, this topic of shortages in the stores and requirements to show your propiska or have a customer ID and how bad it was or how good it was, it's still a hot debated topic. It blows my mind. Sometimes I have a feeling that people grew up in a different Soviet Union because some people are like, yeah, this is what we had to do. Even to purchase socks, I had to bring my passport. And others claim that, no, we had plenty. What are you talking about? So it's interesting. I believe some people have like amnesia. They just try to remember, or they just remember the good stuff and they don't remember anything else. but there's plenty of pictures that prove that people did have to show their passports buying basic groceries that had customer IDs issued to limit access to the grocery stores or other type of stores. So that's pretty interesting situation. Okay, so before I finish this story, and I hope you enjoyed it, don't forget to like this video. I want to add a quick comment about countless pictures of long lines by the stores that I believe mostly foreign tourists took, because there's not a single Soviet person would waste its film taking pictures of a long line by the grocery store. I mean, like, this is like everyday occurrence, so who cares, right? I think most of those lines, they prove not the shortage of goods, because as I said, in Moscow they had hardly any shortage. It's people from out of town who were shopping. Picture Chicago and a long line for Chicago. There's the places has a famous popcorn, Garrett's, I believe. If you see that long line, would you take picture of it and then post on Instagram, look, there's a horrible shortages of popcorn in America? No, it's just people from out of town. They come and to have a taste of this famous Garrett popcorn. Same in New Orleans. There's always a long line. I can't say the name of that food item, beignet. The specific place has a huge multi-hour line for the same reason. It's out-town people want to have a taste of that. Something in Savannah, Georgia was a long line for some famous local ice cream. So a lot of those pictures that you saw, there was actually out-town people shopping in Moscow. So for specific location for Moscow, it's not the proof of shortages, it's just proof of that out-town people were shopping. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video and learned something new. I want to say once again, thank you so much to my patrons who support me on the patreon.com. I will be making specific videos just for you guys. They will have a private access, and what I decided I'm going to do, I'm going to read you my new book, 1996 American Diaries, which I'm in progress of translating, but I got it already about 100 pages ready to go. So as a thank you for your support, I'll be making videos with comments and photos just for you on patreon.com.
How the Soviet regime humiliated those wishing to leave the USSR. This is a translation of an article from a Russian website and narrated by an AI. If you don't like it, we won't produce any more videos like this. Just imagine that you are not allowed to leave your country. Imagine you are not allowed to leave your city. Now imagine that you don't want to leave the area of your city. Think about it for at least 30 seconds. Exactly 30 years ago, an event occurred in our country, the consequences of which millions of Russians are still experiencing to this day. All travel restrictions were abolished. What bans and humiliations were placed on traveling abroad under the USSR, and how was foreign travel restricted in Tsarist times? On May 20, 1991, the Supreme Soviet of the USSR passed a law on the order of exit from the USSR and entry into the USSR by the citizens of the USSR. Towards the very end of the Soviet Union, it introduced perhaps one of the most important reforms, without which any talk of freedom could be considered pointless. This is how the natural human right to freedom of movement was finally given a legislative basis in our country. Soviet citizens were deprived of the freedom to travel outside the country almost immediately after the Bolsheviks came to power. Although the borders were closed, about 3.5 million people left Russia during the Revolution and the Civil War. After all the refugees had to do was to get out of the territories controlled by the Soviets. But what of the past? The inhabitants of the Russian Empire did not need exit visas before 1917, and entry visas had not yet been invented. Once on a train in St. Petersburg, one could get off in Paris with just a passport. The freedom to travel was unimaginable in the world today, but this was not always the case. In the 16th century, the tyrannical rule of Ivan the Terrible led to the closure of borders so that the Tsar's subjects could not escape to his enemies. Prince Kurbsky wrote, "You sealed off the kingdom of Russia, free nature of man, as if in a hellish stronghold, and if someone from your land, you call him a traitor, and if they capture him on the border, then, you put him to death." The comparison of the orders here and abroad was not at all in our favor. which is why the possibility to travel abroad should have been reduced to a minimum, if not completely eliminated. On top of this, the authorities of the Moscow Tsardom feared that any Russian who came into contact with foreigners would immediately be seduced by an alien faith and customs. Therefore, they not only limited the exit, but also forced foreigners coming to Russia to settle in special slobodniks where the locals had no right. Under Alexei Mikhailovich, the reformer and enlightened ruler, a very liberal order of departure was established. The Edict of 1649 required those traveling abroad to have a special letter of return which was obtained by personal request to the Tsar, indicating the purpose of the trip. When it was reported to Alexei Mikhailovich that the son of one of his closest associates had fled abroad without drawing up the documents, he sharply interrupted the accusers. "A young man, he wants to see for himself the creatures and creations of our Lord. So also the bird, flying Semo and Ovimo, but having flown sufficiently, flies to his nest." But from Peter the Great onwards, all that was required was a passport, issued to anyone who wished to travel, even serfs, as there were many wealthy tradesmen or skilled craftsmen among them, for a very modest fee. There was no need to explain the purpose of the journey. The same procedures existed throughout the civilized world. Travel might, however, be subject to restrictions. Paul I forbade young nobles to study abroad, believing that they might pick up revolutionary ideas. As it turned out later, the emperor was right. The Russian army's overseas campaigns fostered an entire generation of Russian officers decabrists. Alexander I repealed this ban, and Nicholas I restored it, however, limiting the exit only to 18 years old. Education in foreign universities was already considered acceptable. Although there was another possibility, the authorities simply could not issue a passport to someone they considered unreliable. This was the reason why Pushkin, who all his life dreamed of seeing historical monuments in Italy and France, never went abroad. The fee for the document also played a role. Initially, it was quite inexpensive, but when the authorities wanted to reduce the number of departures, the rate went up, sometimes reaching such a level that only a well-to-do person could afford to travel abroad. Russian subjects were also forbidden to reside outside their own country for long periods, at first, for no more than 5 years, then 2 years for the nobility, and a year for the rest of the estates. For a long time there was a rule that those who went abroad had to publish an announcement about it in a local newspaper in advance so that the creditors had time to collect from him the debts. On April 12, 1881, Emperor Alexander III allowed the emperor to leave Russia freely and all restrictions were lifted with the exception of the passport. Strange as it may seem, this measure was not at all liberal, but conservative. The authorities hoped that revolutionaries dissatisfied with the order in Russia would leave the country. It turned out, however, that Jews, dissatisfied with the restrictions imposed by the Pale of Settlement, were leaving the country en masse. And the departure abroad of supporters of radical parties led to the formation of restless colonies of political emigrants in London, Paris, and Geneva, who published revolutionary newspapers and books, sent subversive literature and trained agitators to Russia, while being completely immune to the police. Subversive in Russia, they were perfectly law-abiding in their place of residence. When the Bolsheviks came to power in December 1917, they already issued an instruction: not only a passport was required to travel, but also a permit issued by the NKVD or Commissariat for Foreign Affairs. In 1925, a procedure was established which was generally in force until 1991 and which required a special exit visa. But in order to get the coveted stamp, a lot of documents had to be collected. A very detailed questionnaire was required from those leaving the country, which served as the first filter. Leaving the country could be denied due to relatives abroad, wrong nationality or origin, and also if a Soviet citizen was involved in state secrets, which were declared to be very important in Soviet times. Then, one had to be recommended by a workers' collective, party or Komsomol organization. Recommendations from academic institutions, sports associations, and veterans organizations did not work badly. In general, the more the better. It was necessary to prove to the officials that you were a reliable Soviet citizen, fully committed to the cause of the party. An inquiry was sent to the authorities about the person who was leaving, in case he or she had been caught doing something wrong. Finally, a commission at the district party committee completed all the troubles. there could come across some insidious people who were convinced that even a trip to the Bulgarian Black Sea coast required knowledge of the decisions of the last CPSU Congress, the name of the head of the French Communist Party, a detailed account of how the people of Cuba were fighting for their freedom, and ideologically correct judgments about the conflict in Palestine. Any mistake or doubt entailed a strong rejection. There was no appeal for an ordinary man, unless he was a party functionary, a scholar of international renown, or a celebrated athlete. Rejected was rejected. Only Jews had relative freedom to leave the USSR, but only once. Since they were thought to be emigrating to Israel, their nation-state, the prohibition was too damaging to the international prestige of the USSR. Therefore the departure of the Jews was allowed, but with a lot of restrictions. Since 1965, it was allowed to release no more than 1,500 people a year. In 1970 the quota was increased to 3,000, at the same time it was not allowed to release people with state secrets, scientists and artists. The most interesting thing is that almost half of the emigrants who made it to Vienna, the first point of transfer, did not go to the promised land, where, moreover, a constant war was going on, but to the much more comfortable countries of the US and Germany. The dissidents demanded quotas for emigration for Armenians, Germans, Crimean Tatars and other peoples with significant diasporas, but the Soviet government refused to give them any. For us who are used to freedom of exit, it is already difficult to imagine how severe these restrictions were in the USSR. A student could not leave to pursue a course in the branch of science in which he or she was engaged and in which he or she had achieved great success abroad. Scientists, even the most venerable ones, had to beg for permission to speak at international scientific conferences. Acquaintance with foreign colleagues in Soviet science was more often than not limited to correspondence, and the opportunity to travel abroad was restricted to a very small circle of the select few. Ordinary Soviet citizens could only see the world from their television screens. Travel abroad was limited to the countries of the socialist camp. Even Yugoslavia, with its light touch of capitalism, was considered a country where not everyone was allowed. To go to Italy or France, full of art monuments, was almost impossible. A trip to a socialist country was also very expensive, let alone a trip to a capitalist one. An added humiliation was the currency exchange regulations that left Soviet tourists on hunger strike and forced them to smuggle goods for resale to enrich their wallets. In 1991, all restrictions were lifted. Citizens of the USSR, and then Russia, were given the opportunity to travel abroad without having to explain the purpose of their visit to party committees, and without collecting a bunch of meaningless certificates. In 1993, the authorities finally abolished exit visas and lifted restrictions on the issuance of passports. This arrangement is still in place today, although the restrictions on travel and entry associated with the pandemic increasingly raise the question of whether freedom of movement around the world was only a fleeting moment, to be followed by an era of closed borders, carefully constructed by all countries, even those that until recently prided themselves on their traditions of freedom.
In today's video we're going to talk about joys of owning a Soviet passport. And I'm planning to make a separate video by my own experience having a Soviet passport. I got it when I was 16 years old, so that was 1987. But right now let's learn about experience of Robert Robertson, black engineer from United States who spent 44 years in the Soviet Union and who wrote the book Black on Red, My 44 Years Inside the USSR. I think Comrade Robertson's experience with the Soviet passport is extremely interesting and valuable because he came to the Soviet Union as an American citizen and then he gave up his citizenship and he accepted Soviet citizenship. So he had experience living in the USSR as an American and now he lives as a Soviet. If you follow my coverage of his book Black on Red, we stopped at the part when he went to the Odessa to be filmed in the movie Miklucha Maklai, and actually this movie is available on YouTube, which is quite amazing, and you could see Robert Robertson playing a native from Papua New Guinea. So while filming that movie, he had his watch stolen. So let's see what he says. The local police soon got to know me also. My encounter with Odessa police began when I reported that my watch was stolen from the locker I was using in a room next to the studio. It was a precious possession because my brother had given it to me as a gift in 1926, and it was the most reliable watch I had ever owned. The film director wasted no time in calling the police. In a matter of minutes, 3 officers arrived. They questioned everyone, so here's pretty much goes description how they went through really quick. It was fast reaction, so very impressive work for the Soviet police. About 30 minutes after the first policeman arrived, another officer appeared with a large dog, which sniffed every inch of the locker room floor. When the dog arrived, everyone knew the situation was potentially dangerous. For such theft, a person could end up with 3 years imprisonment at hard labor. Every member of the production crew was interrogated a second time. We were kept 4 hours after our normal quitting time, but not a clue was discovered. So for 3 days, police was searching, and 3 days later, Robertson received a phone call from the Central Police Headquarters asking him to come down there and bring my passport along. I showed up as requested on the following day. When I mentioned who I was, the officer on duty greeted me warmly and escorted me to the Assistant Chief of Police, who also seemed very gracious. He asked me to have a seat and said, "I am sorry that we haven't been able to find your watch, which I understand you value very much. Be assured that we will continue our investigation. We'll find the culprit and you will get your watch back." I thanked him for his concern, and all the while wondering why I was being treated with such care. That's a good part coming up. Soon I found out. "Please," said Assistant Police Chief, "may I have your passport? I need the number on it, so should my men find your watch after you leave Odessa, they will have a means of contacting you." I handed it to him. Yet when he noticed that it was a Soviet passport, his entire demeanor immediately changed. One moment he was cordial, the next moment he was indifferent. "Oh, I see you have a Soviet passport," he said, unable to conceal his surprise. He handed back to me and did not even bother to write the number on the official form, but merely scribble it on a piece of scrap paper, which was obviously destined for the trash can as soon as I left. Now that he knew I was a Soviet citizen, my stolen watch no longer mattered. They had all assumed that I was a foreign actor. Once again, reminder, Robert Robertson was African American. But now, since they knew I would not be going to a foreign country where I could criticize the Soviet Union and its police force, I no longer mattered. I was certain that he would call off the investigation and I would never see my watch again. My hunch turned out to be correct. So I found this part of the Robert Robertson book extremely interesting and somewhat funny, because there's the guy who, he spent a lot of years already in the Soviet Union, pretty much more than 10 years, and he figured out that there's a double standard going on for the Soviet citizens versus foreign citizens. So while they were thinking that he was a foreigner, he had a top service from the police, and they were searching extremely hard looking for his watch. As long as they discovered he's a Soviet citizen, he completely lost any interest. I had a kind of similar experience, but from a different perspective. I was a citizen of the Soviet Union, and I had a Soviet passport for traveling abroad, and I used it even after 1991, after Soviet Union collapsed. They didn't have a new passports for Ukraine, so they let people use their old Soviet passports. And I traveled to America 3 times with my Soviet passport, and every time on every border, I always had trouble crossing the border because my passport was like a red flag. They were questioning me. One time, even having a green card, well, that time I already had a Ukrainian passport, but still, they made me sit in the airport in Amsterdam, then let me out. And then when I got American passport, I noticed what a huge difference was traveling with United States passport. It's pretty much all the doors wide open. No one cared about visas or what the reason you want to go out of the airport, or do you have any reasons to stay there legally. No one asks any questions if you're an American citizen, you have American passport. traveling with Soviet passport and later with Ukrainian passport was a real nightmare. And I was literally up to the border officer, because one time I already had green card, as I mentioned, and I had Ukrainian passport. They let me out and I spent a night in Amsterdam, flying from Kyiv back to Chicago. Next time, the different guy said, no, you can't leave, you have to sit in the airport. And I was extremely upset because I was planning to visit Amsterdam. I found it as a beautiful city. Then when I had American passport, I went again, and the question was, what the reason of visiting Amsterdam? And I just said, I want to hang out. And he just smiled, and I said, welcome to Amsterdam. Just put the stamp on my American passport, and here we go. So as a Ukrainian citizen, I had to explain for 5 minutes that tomorrow I'm flying to Chicago. There's my visa. There's my green card. There's my plane ticket. As American citizen, I just said that I'm planning to hang out in Amsterdam. It was enough. Just, you're welcome, and you go. And that's one of the biggest mistakes that Robert Robertson made. I mean, it made his life way more interesting and challenging, but because he refused to return to the United States when American government requested him to, and he lost his citizenship, they ended up being stuck in the Soviet Union for 44 years and barely could escape the Soviet Union through Africa in the 70s, just because he got Soviet passport, and that was now up to Soviet government if he could travel anywhere. Okay, this video is a little bit short, but I hope you still enjoy it. As always, please don't forget to like it, and we'll talk to you soon. До свидания. Goodbye.
Sergey wrote a book based on diaries he made when he was first in the United States. And as I understand, this is just volume 1, right?
That's correct.
He's going to have multiple volumes coming out. Well, I said, well, since Sergey is kind enough to come up and speak with us, I bought the book. I said, I might as well read this. I read this in one sitting. 2 hours, 2.5 hours. I just couldn't put it down. It was so fascinating because your writing is very compelling, for one. And his story is very interesting for two. It's really interesting. You know, we've lived here our whole lives. We don't have that perspective. It's just so interesting to hear someone else's perspective about what we take for granted. So I hope you really tune in and listen to what he has to say. It's a very interesting, very informed perspective. Sergey is not a historian. He's an electrical engineer by trade, but I find that he has a depth of understanding on history, economics, culture. So just a very observant fellow and a great storyteller. So